Hey, welcome back to Less Than an Amateur Theologian. So, this is actually a question that came from my niece, of all people, and she was asking, why is it kids in the church behave a lot like kids in the world? What's the purpose of even trying to pursue Jesus at this stage versus kids who later on do it as adults and do it, when they're old and stuff like that? And I'm not going to use the scare tactics of, oh, he comes like a thief in the night, but I do want to put forth some verses that would basically give a better understanding. And so we're going to start with Matthew, the great book of Matthew. And let's see here. There we go. So Matthew, circa 24 here, and Jesus puts forth this parable here. And it says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in a field. But when the man slept, his enemies came and sowed tares among the wheat, and then went away. And when the blade sprang up, it brought forth fruit, and appeared the tares also. And the servant of the household came and said to him, Sir, did thou not sow good seed in thy field? Whence hath it tares? And he said unto them, An enemy hath done this. And the servant said to him, Wilt thou that we go and gather them up? Then he says, Nay, lest haply you gather up the tares, and you root up the wheat with them. Let them both grow together until harvest. And at the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather up first the tares, and bind them into bundles, and burn them, and gather the wheat into my barn." So this is, in itself, this is actually an apocalyptic end of the world as you know it verse. Story by Jesus. But that's not what I want to focus for. So it's interesting here. He says, will you gather them up? Let them grow together until the harvest. Now, I believe it's King James. Let me see here. No, it's not. There is one where it says, "Let them mature together." I forget exactly which translation it was, but the idea is that sometimes it takes time. It takes time for these things to mature, and people are much the same way. And that's why I added a couple case studies to my notes here. Let's go into Genesis. This happens all the time. Genesis 12:11. "And it came to pass, when he entered into Egypt," this is Abraham, by the way, "he said to Sarai his wife, Behold, thou art a fair woman." He says, "You're a beautiful girl. Therefore it will come to pass, the Egyptians will see you. They'll say, Hey, this is his wife. Let's kill him and save you. So I pray, say you're my sister." Then it comes to pass, right here, that they saw her, and she was beautiful. And Pharaoh ends up buying her. He entreated Abraham for her sake. That's basically him saying, okay, I'll give you money and stuff like that. She's mine. This is Abraham. This is Abraham, and what's he doing? He's basically selling his wife to someone else. You don't sell your woman that way, dude. So, tries to sell his woman. And at the end of this story, he ends up getting blessed by God. But at the same point in time, though, he's already supposed to be walking with God. And he screws this up. You'd think he'd learn his lesson. Genesis 20. Abraham to Sarah's wife, "She is my sister." He does it again. So here's this guy who basically screws up with his wife twice. But yet he's supposed to be walking with God. Abraham at that time was not fully mature. And it took years. It took a lot that God had to pull him through before he eventually matured. I mean, he even takes Hagar, his wife's servant, sleeps with her to get a kid to help God along. And it's like, no, dude, God told you what he's going to do, and you got to mature in it. Let's look at Acts. What happened in Acts? Acts 7. Acts 7:58. Now, if you don't know who Stephen is, Stephen's stoned to death. Let me find it here. Okay. So here they're actually stoning Stephen. But what I want to point out here is right here in verse 58. They cast him out of the city. And the witness laid down clothes at the man's feet, whose name was Saul. And they stoned Stephen, calling upon God, saying, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Saul. Who is this Saul guy? You guys heard of the Apostle Paul? Saul was not doing well by the Christians, and it took a while. We don't actually find him until chapter 22, verse 20, where Jesus says to him, when the blood of Stephen was shed, that he was also standing by. And Saul kept his clothes. This is like the guy who wrote most of the New Testament was there at the stoning, the execution of St. Stephen. People change. People mature. Even Moses had his setbacks. And I should have looked him up, but if you read Exodus, God tells Moses at one time, speak to the rock. And instead of speaking to the rock, Moses hits the rock. And so God has his way of letting people mature and challenging them. So you're going to see those times where the people who look like they're Christian but maybe aren't will probably be the ones that fall away. Just like the parable of the wheat and the tares. Tares and wheat, those two looked a lot like each other, but it wasn't until they were fully mature that you could tell which was which. And then, of course, you had, again, Saul, Moses, Saul, aka Paul, Moses, Abraham. David had his weak points. Everyone that's been walking with God has had their weak points. The question is when they are fully mature, when they arrive, are they going to be the people that God wants them to be? God knows. We don't. So, you see your classmates running around, acting foolish. Sometimes you got, girls in the church, preacher's girl gets knocked up, stuff like that. Things like that happen. But that's because these people aren't fully mature, and despite their choices, God can still use them greatly. This is Less Than an Amateur Theologian saying, God bless.